So Deadpool basically ruled the world earlier in the year. Officially made for a budget just shy of $60 million, it's made almost $800 million worldwide. To say this was a surprise is something of an understatement. Though the marketing was undeniably excellent, this was an R-rated adaptation of a comic so obscure to most audiences the film was basically an original property. People expected it could be successful, but it still stunned everyone with just how much of a box office juggernaut it turned out to be. Ryan Reynolds and the director Tim Miller have been attached to the project since 2011, but it has taken this long for the film to be made and released. For a long time, Fox didn't trust that the film could do well enough to warrant going all the way, so even paid for Miller to create a test reel for the film to show how it could turn out. It was the leak of this reel and subsequent response online that finally convinced Fox to go all the way, albeit with a smaller budget than one might expect for a superhero film, led by a star like Reynolds, though admittedly his star status has dimmed in the past few years. The thing that really worked in Deadpool's favour was that they could make the film their way. For the $60 million budget, they were given the freedom to really run with the initial script that had gotten the whole creative team so excited about the film. They knew they had something special, they worked hard to get it made, and they did it the way they wanted to. So now the film is released and steamrolled cinemas worldwide, making almost as much as the monstrously expensive Batman v Superman, and being received far better critically. What did Deadpool do so right as a movie? And what can Hollywood learn from its success? Well, to begin with, they nailed the character of Deadpool, and the relatively unique concepts of the comic around him.
Did I leave the stove on?
Not just as an adaptation, though that was pulled off almost perfectly, but also as part of the film. This is a film that throws itself fully into the rather out there concept of a violent, foul-mouthed, fourth wall breaking anti-hero and almost villain, a character the large majority of the audience wouldn't have heard of previously. It trusts the concept itself. The fact that he exists in a sort of meta-reality riffing directly to the audience about the film itself and referencing other films and pop culture. It's a violent action movie and pretty hilarious comedy. I mean, I enjoyed it at least. Tied together in a uniquely structured origin movie. There is another thing they pulled off really well. The problem with a lot of comic adaptations that go the origin route is that they take so long for you to actually see the hero get into the costume, or in the case of Daredevil, almost an entire season. Deadpool found a creative way to make what is a pretty slight main mission, with a lot of the action simply being the highway fight and final fight, feel longer, and it gets around having the origin story force us into waiting to see Deadpool in all his glory. We begin with the action scene first seen in the test reel, and it's a full 14 minutes before we get to the first extended flashback. For the first hour, the time it can take for us to actually see the superhero in full form in other origin films, we have this flip-flopping of flashback and present before the timeline catches up with itself and takes us into the final sequence. In a time nowadays when it is rare to see a superhero film be less than 2 hours, the 108-minute running time of Deadpool feels like a relief. It doesn't waste time, introduces a relationship between Wade Wilson and Vanessa quickly, and still in a way that feels pretty edgy with the flirting revolving around some pretty dark humor.
I was molested.
Me too.
In fact, one of my main issues is how this film turned a potentially very interesting female character into the usual damsel in distress plot device by the final reel. Though the film didn't make too many missteps for me, this was a little disappointing. Another potential issue for many, and also fits with the current superhero trend, is not having a great villain. Marvel suffered greatly from this, and here we have a very standard generic British bad guy, who is only really there to be evil and the one who turns Wade Wilson into the haunting Deadpool. The antagonist is fine, but certainly not memorable, but perhaps that isn't such a bad thing. The best villains are either a reflection of the hero or the direct opposite. Deadpool is a quick-witted chatterbox, and this guy is just a bit dull. He couldn't really be more different from Wade. And in Gina Carano, we get a fantastic henchman role that plays well to her strengths. They hired the right person for the role and let her do the job she is good at. These guys don't get in the way. This is Deadpool's film. We are here to see him. We have the now inevitable sequel to start introducing more interesting villains. So let's talk about the action. The action is fine, but it's nothing incredibly game-changing. It works, it's clear and easy to follow, but generally, what is actually happening is quite derivative. Miller sets everything up well. I love that in the first action scene we establish where the bad guys are first, before focusing almost solely on Deadpool. The geography is clear and efficient throughout the film, and allows us to always stick with the most fun part of the action scenes. Deadpool himself. I bang on about tension within action scenes a lot, and this is something I consider incredibly important. So how do we get this with a character that can't die? And I don't mean by just making his love interest a plot device. The fact is, the The tension matters less here, as this guy is simply fun to be around. There's an originality to the action, in how Deadpool acts within the constructs of these basic action sequences. We want to see what he can do thanks to his incredible skill, and how he will react to things. We care about this guy, even with how awful a person he kind of is. Even the X-Men can't help but kinda like him. He's not John McClane in the likable hero stakes, but he's on the same wavelength in that you enjoy spending time with him, seeing him react in unconventional ways within conventional action scenes. It keeps us going through the otherwise well-made but standard fights, simply to see how he will play up the conventions. From reactions like this, to keeping track of his ammo like this, or even recognizing an old friend on the opposite side.
Bob? Wait?
What really makes the film work for me is the inventiveness inherent with the character, but also from the script's writers and the director. It's anything but what we have come to expect with a blockbuster-style movie. Hell, this is even nicely small scale. Almost every big action film now threatens a city or the world. This is a story of a guy trying to be good looking again and saving his girlfriend. Even the fights themselves are small scale. It's never more than a dozen guys at a time, and the final fight is just two guys of similar size going toe to toe, albeit with some nice mutant action working in tandem. The great thing about the film is simply how much of a relief it is relative to what else is out there at the moment. It's similar for me to how Marvel's Ant-Man made me feel, with its big final fight happening rather wonderfully in a child's bedroom. The greater stakes were there, with Yellow Jacket's plan being potentially pretty devastating, but compared to how almost every other blockbuster threatens millions of lives, I appreciated how these films kept it personal. So, should all comic adaptations be smaller scale and rated R now for a better return on investment? No. The fact is, we have had other small-scale R-rated comic book adaptations of more popular characters, and they didn't do anywhere near as well as this. I do have a lot of love for Blade 2, for example, and Blade Trinity even stars Deadpool himself, and I enjoy much from the various Punisher adaptations, but what Deadpool really did different for me is the trust the studio placed in the vision of the creators. The writers even did a PG-13 version of the script to appease the studio, but the one that we saw was, according to the writers, at least 70% of their initial hard R draft. The original creative vision for an exciting, basically original property was trusted. The failure of these earlier R-rated comic efforts proves that the R-rated comic book adaptation isn't a simple recipe for success. It's more that one of the key things is not to be afraid of working within the rating most suited to the property. I'm not against Wolverine going R-rated, especially since James Mangold already tried that with his R-rated cut of the Wolverine long before the Deadpool movie came out. But let's not just start making wacky, R-rated, fourth wall-breaking superhero films. The thing to learn is to not be afraid to go for the more out-there option. Don't be afraid to trust the creators. This was a film made for a specific audience, by creators wanting to do right by a character they have a lot of love for, and yet it has connected with a wider audience. They didn't try to pander to the widest demographic at all, but instead made a film for them. Deadpool is a pretty simple, small-scale, fun action movie with a puerile sense of humor and an obscure hero.
Is it sexist to hit you? Is it more sexist to not hit you? I mean, the line gets real blurry.
It didn't cost the world, but made an incredible amount of money. When thinking of what to greenlight next, look to more original properties or entirely original properties. Making a big film and filling it with stars doesn't do all your work. You have to trust the vision, spend time developing, and of course make it good. Batman v Superman, in my opinion, was a mess of a film. It was also greenlit only a very short time before its announcement to the world and rushed through with a script designed to kickstart a franchise. Deadpool took its time, cost relatively little, with Tim Miller spending time to craft easy-to-follow fun action scenes with an actor that understood every facet of his character, in a script tuned to work in exactly the way it needed to best serve the story, and has also started a new franchise. Deadpool isn't perfect, but I want to see a sequel to it. There are other original films out there from interesting artists waiting to be made. Trust in those visions, and by spending relatively little the way Deadpool did, protect yourself. You'll find new franchises you didn't even know could exist, and maybe make some great cinema along the way.